In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace your upper ball joint. Let's get started. Let's remove the wheel, take off this cap if you have one, use a pry bar or a screwdriver, just be gentle not to damage it or the wheel. Set it aside and then use your 22mm socket and remove all 8 of your lug nuts. Remove the wheel. Now we have to remove these 3 T27 Torx bolts so that the locking mechanism off the hub can come out. And to do that, I like to sometimes take a pick. These are pretty clean inside, so it's fine, but a lot of times they'll get buildup of debris in there. So I take a pick and clean out so that my socket can seat itself properly all the way. Otherwise, you run the risk of stripping the head of the bolt, and that is never fun. But basically, remove all 3 of them, and then we can pull this locking mechanism out of the way. Slide this out. Just has a rubber O-ring that sometimes can get a little stuck in there. There it is. At this point, I would want to take a razor blade, scrape this off nice and clean so that I can put a new gasket on it and seal everything up nicely. If yours is extremely corroded and you need to sand it down, you can either use some sandpaper by hand or very carefully use a gentle sanding pad and get rid of all the debris. In the end, this is what it should look like, nice and clean. You can use a 21mm socket. Basically what I'm doing is I'm taking off the whole bracket with the caliper as an assembly. It'll be a lot easier to manage that way. Okay, this one's off. Leave it in a few threads so that it holds the whole bracket and caliper while I take this one off. Now be careful because these are heavy. Take off the top bolt. Finish removing the bottom. Take this off, set it up right on top. And now with the caliper off, let's go ahead and remove the rotor. If yours is stuck on there, mine's pretty new, but if yours is stuck, just hammer in between the lug studs. Make sure you don't hit the lug studs, and that should break it free. Next, I want to remove the tie rod. To do that, we have to get this cotter pin out of here. It might not come out, but if it does, that would be great. If it doesn't, like this one's pretty rotted. I'm just going to cut it flush, and then we'll have to get this castle nut cover off of here because the nut is actually underneath. So I've been spraying this with rust penetrant, hoping to break it free, but I don't think that's happening. Yeah, this just disintegrated. So I'm going to cut it flush, and we will remove it as is. We'll figure the rest out later. Now, unfortunately, I won't be able to reuse this locking cap for the nut just because I'm going to have to kind of break it and bend it out of the way. But as long as the cotter pin is in there, it should be good. Okay, just clean off the threads a little bit. Give this the best chance it has at coming off. 21mm socket. I'm going to leave this on a few threads so that when I take the tie rod out of here, it doesn't fall down completely. There we go. Grab a hammer, hit the knuckle right here. That's going to break the tie rod free from the knuckle. There we go. Take the nut off, remove the tie rod. Now if you look right inside of the hub, you'll see that snap ring in there. We're going to have to take that out, so get your snap ring pliers. Here we go. Ooh. That's a tough one. Okay. It's a very tough snap ring, so you're going to have to put some force into it. Just be careful, because if it snaps, it can go flying. Our next problem is going to be the ABS sensor. This one is very rusted, as you can see. I don't want to try to remove it off of the wheel bearing. I think the best way to go in this case is to just remove the wire off of the truck, unplug it, and keep it bolted onto the wheel bearing. that is the best way to go if you don't want to have to buy a new one and potentially drill this hole back out. So having said that, let me show you how to remove it. Follow it up, and on the knuckle, you'll see this 8mm bolt here. Let's go ahead and remove this. Okay. And if you look right here next to the spring, there are 2 more. Remove both of these. Now, thankfully, these did not break for me. Well, I guess I shouldn't speak now, there's one left, but usually they break. As you can see, this sleeve here gets packed with rust and it snaps right off. If that happens to you, you're gonna have to find a different way to mount these, but it doesn't seem like that's gonna be the issue for us today. All right, wire's free. Pop it off the frame right here, or the front axle. With this open, you can remove the wire, and if you follow it up right over here, we can just unplug it from the main harness. There's quite a bit of sand buildup in there. There we go. Perfect. Now with the 21mm socket, let's remove all 4 mounting nuts that hold the wheel hub bearing onto this knuckle. Spin it the other way so we can get to the other 2 bolts. I'm going to go ahead and actually put them all back on just flush with the stud. But what I'm going to do now is use this adapter on my air hammer, and with my 21mm socket I'm going to actually push on the nut, and that's going to hopefully drive the bearing off of the knuckle. Now if you don't have that, the only other way to do it is, well, to use a hammer, and that usually starts damaging things. So if you are trying to reuse your bearing after you're done, this is the only way to do it. Otherwise you would have to replace, depending on where you're hammering, either the whole bearing or the studs that mount it. And there we go. Here is your wheel bearing. It comes off with the backing plate. Make sure your ABS cable comes with it. Remove it from the knuckle and set it aside. At this point, we have to remove the axle. The way I'm going to do that is by taking a pry bar. And my dust seal is already broken, as you can see here, so I don't have to worry about it. If yours is not broken, it'll look something like this, and you can just pry over here. But for me, it doesn't really matter, so I'm just going to pry right on it. There we go. All right, so you need a long pry bar and a lot of force. And with that done, you can pull this axle right out. Let's remove the vacuum hose. I'm going to give it a couple twists to hopefully break it free, and try to lift it up and off of the fitting here. It is very rusty, so be careful not to break it. There we go. Now it's time to remove the upper and lower ball joint nuts to free up the knuckle. And well, as you can see here, the ball joint nut for me is no longer usable with a socket. So what I'm going to do is either cut it or torch it. So hopefully for you, you can still use it with a socket. Like I said, I'm probably going to go get the cutoff wheel or the torch and get this off of here. Well, there it is. And now through the knuckle, I'm going to sneak in a 34mm socket, and let's try to break this nut free. Okay, broke it free with the breaker bar. Switch to a ratchet. All right. I'm going to spray this with some rust penetrant, and then what I'm going to do is put the nut back on a few threads, and then we'll give it a couple taps with the hammer, and hopefully this breaks free. And the reason I'm putting the nut back on is so that when the knuckle does break free, it doesn't just fall to the ground. It gets caught by the nut. Once I'm ready to remove it, I will remove it. Turn it this way, hit it on the other side. Remove the nut, drop the knuckle down. Now, in order to remove just the upper ball joint, I want to cut this stud off so I can use a cup here and receive the ball joint into it. And this stud being so long makes it so that I can't use any cup. The one that I have actually will not work because it doesn't have a hole for the stud to poke through. So I'm going to cut it off with a cutoff wheel, but I'm sure there are multiple ways of doing this. This is just how I decided to do it. All right, here's my setup. I have a little tiny spacer here pushing on the center of the ball joint, and I have a large cup with an adapter for the ball joint press to press up against. And basically what I'm aiming to do is press this ball joint up and out. There you have it. Worked flawlessly, so the only difficult part is having to cut the stud. Now to install this ball joint, you can't press on the stud, you have to press on this outer lip here. So what we have to do is pull the boot off so that we can get access to this lip. Take a little pocket screwdriver or whatever you have and just gently pry this up. Try not to break it. If you break it, you're gonna have to get a new one. Open this up, and at this point you want to avoid getting debris in here where the grease is. And this is how it's going to go in. We'll position it like that. Find a cup that fits over, and you want to press on this ridge right here. Not on the stud, not in the center, not anywhere else. Okay, similar setup as for when I removed it. Let's tighten it up, and this should press all the way down. Okay, audible difference in sound of the impact, so let's loosen this up. Take the boot, slide it right over, and press it on all the way. In order to ensure that it's fully seated, I'm just going to take this cup, kind of walk it around like this. Be careful not to cut the boot or damage it, but there you go. Ball joint is installed. One more quick thing I want to mention is right here you can see the ball joint is flush with the knuckle. Now this ball joint does have the option for a snap ring, but for this particular application it does not require a snap ring. As you can see, the knuckle is built to not take the snap ring. The snap ring is a little bit deeper in there, so don't be alarmed if you cannot put it on. It does come with it, but of course that is because this ball joint is most likely going to fit multiple different applications. So again, don't worry about it. As long as it's bottomed out, it will be secured in there just fine. Now I'm going to take my knuckle, slide it back up in here. I have the top nut ready. Might have to wiggle it around a little bit so the ball joints can move left and right. I'm going to secure this top nut. Looks like my little sleeve here popped out. That's okay. Fix that in a little bit. Okay, so ball joint is secure, or the knuckle is secure. Let's put the lower nut on. Put on the lower nut. Trying to lift it up as much as possible so I can get it as far down as possible by hand. And now we'll tighten it up. This new nut is a 32 millimeter. Okay, that's nice and tight. Let's get the torque wrench. 184 foot-pounds is the torque for this lower ball joint. At this point, if you look up at the top ball joint, you can see that camber adjusting sleeve popped out. That's what this is. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drive it back down. Bring the nut down so that you avoid hitting the threads. All right, at this point, once we tighten the nut, this should continue tightening by itself. This is also a 32 millimeter. Now the torque for this one is only 69 foot-pounds. And now if the cotter pin hole does not line up, just go ahead and keep tightening until it does. Mine is actually perfect. Stick your cotter pin through. Let's bend it up and over to lock it in. Don't forget to reconnect your vacuum hose. I put just a tiny bit of silicone paste on the outside of that fitting just so it doesn't seize up and doesn't continue to rust more, hopefully. But anyway, don't forget to put that on. Now it's time to reinstall the axle shaft. Slide it in to the front differential. Once it gets to the middle there, try to guide it so that it doesn't mess up the seal. Now we just have to push it in all the way. So I'm going to take a rubber mallet, hit the end of the axle here, and drive it in all the way. All right, it's in. It's even everywhere. If it doesn't want to go in, that's because the splines aren't lined up, so you just have to turn it until it lines up, and then you should be all set. At this point, I just want to give this area a super quick cleaning so that the hub has a nice flat surface to mount on. And in your case, if it's less rusty, you could just use a wire brush. I'm going to choose to sand this down because it has some rot here and over here around the edge, and I want to get rid of all of that. If you want to use a razor blade, you can use that. It just might not get rid of everything. Or if you have a sanding block, that would actually be the best thing because it's flat. It leaves a flat surface after you're done. I'm going to use a worn out, soft sanding pad to do this. You don't want to dig into this material here and remove it and make an uneven surface. Clean it down with brake parts cleaner. And now let's coat the whole area with some anti-seize. Now let's take the wheel bearing, make sure the ABS sensor is at the top, and slide the studs through the knuckle. Press it in all the way. Make sure the ABS wire's not getting pinched. There we go. Move the axle around if needed so it can get into the seal there. Okay, the wheel bearing is bottomed out all the way. Let's put the mounting nuts on. Now let's put the 4 mounting nuts on. And let's tighten them up. I'm going to go in a cross pattern, that way the wheel bearing can seat itself properly. Now we have to torque them, which I will also do in a cross pattern for the same exact reason. The torque for this is 133 foot-pounds. I'm going to have to spin this a little bit. This lower one while I'm at it. Okay, last one. And now just double check them all. All right, tight. Now we have to put on the snap ring. You should have a new one, but if for some reason you don't, if yours is in good condition, you can reuse it. Okay, it's almost on, so what I'm going to do now is take a pry bar and just push it into place. There we go. That just fell into place all the way around. Now let's plug in our ABS sensor. Make sure it clicks, and then just go down the line and re-secure it everywhere where it needs to be secured. Re-secure these over here. Put some anti-seize on the bolts. That way they hopefully don't rust even more than they already did. Last one right up here. All right, ABS wire is secured. At this point, I'd like to put anti-seize on the hub surface so that the rotor doesn't seize up on it. Try not to get it too much on the studs. Now make sure the mounting surface of your rotor is clean. I have a new rotor, so I don't have to worry about that. Now we have to get the old gasket off of this four-wheel drive locking mechanism for the hub. The easiest way to do this is to take a razor blade, go all the way around, just peel it off. Make sure you get all of the remaining gasket off. Right here where it's got the dowel pin, I'm going to have to cut it, I think, unless it wants to peel off. Okay, there you have it. Pull it up, and the surface looks in very good condition. I'm going to scrape off the rest of this goo that was left behind by the gasket. You can use a wire brush if needed. I'm going to add a little bit of grease to the inner part here and a little bit to the outside, just so I can have some fresh grease coating all these gears here. You don't need a lot. And with this clean, if you don't have a new gasket, I don't, unfortunately, you can just use a tiny bit of gasket maker and goop it around the bolt holes. Make sure you go on the outside and around these divots here, and you should be all set. Nice thin layer, that's all you need. In this case, it's actually easier if I apply it with my finger. Now let's slide this in. Make sure the splines line up. Press it on all the way, and then you just have to locate the dowel pin with one of the holes. Once you do, you can press it on all the way. The O-ring seals up. Let's bolt it. Start on the 3 bolts. Let's bottom them out, and then you just make them snug. These don't really take a lot of torque to tighten down, so once you bottom them out, just give them a little extra, and it should be all set. Okay. Put the tie rod back through the knuckle. Put the nut on. Let's tighten it up. Torque it to 85 foot-pounds. All right. Put the cotter pin through. There you go. Put your cotter pin through and bend it over to lock it in. Let's bring the caliper over and remount it. I have my bolts ready. That way I can bolt it up as soon as it lines up because it's pretty heavy. Now tighten these up and torque them to 166 foot-pounds. And 2. All right, let's get the wheel back on. Put on all 8 of your lug nuts, bottom them out, and then we'll torque these in a cross pattern to 165 foot-pounds. And don't forget about this cap.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.